The desert night was cruel that evening, too quiet before the thunder of hooves came. Evelyn Carter had heard stories of raids before, of outlaws and Apache bands, but she never believed her family's small wagon train would meet such a fate. They had left Missouri with dreams of California gold and a better life, carrying only hope, prayer, and a few possessions. But dreams, she would soon learn, could burn as easily as dry grass. The first shot cracked through the twilight. A horse screamed. Then chaos followed. Men shouting, women crying, the sharp ring of iron and the desperate neighing of animals tearing against their tethers. Evelyn's father, James Carter, grabbed his rifle and told her to stay hidden under the wagon. She did as he said, pressing herself against the earth, her heart hammering as boots pounded past. Through the thin fabric of the wagon's canvas, she saw shadows move, broad shoulders, knives glinting in the firelight. Her father fired once, twice. A cry echoed. Then silence. "Papa?" she whispered. No answer. When she crawled out, she saw her world undone. The wagons were burning, the air thick with smoke and fear. Her father lay still beside the horses, a dark wound across his chest. Her mother was gone, dragged away, judging by the prints in the sand. Evelyn tried to stand, but her legs gave out. A man's hand seized her by the arm, rough and strong. His teeth were yellow in the firelight as he said, "Pretty little thing. You'll fetch good trade." She fought, scratching, kicking, screaming, but the blow came fast, knocking the stars from her sight. The world spun. When she awoke, the camp was quiet, her head throbbing, her mouth dry as dust. The bandits had taken what they wanted and left her behind, a broken reminder of cruelty. She crawled toward her father, shaking him, begging him to wake. But his body was already cold. She pressed her face to his chest and sobbed until she had no sound left. By dawn, she could hardly move. The sun rose mercilessly over the canyon, its heat burning through her torn dress. Buzzards circled above. Evelyn tried to stand again and fell. She thought of her mother, of the life they had dreamed of, and whispered to the sky, "Please, just let me die." That was when she heard it, the slow rhythm of hooves approaching, softer than before. She lifted her head, expecting death to finally come. Instead, she saw him. An Apache warrior rode from the horizon, his horse dark and sure-footed. He dismounted slowly, cautious yet unafraid. His hair was long and bound with a strip of leather. His face was marked with paint and shadow. In his hand he carried a knife slick with blood, but not hers. He moved past her body toward the bandit corpses scattered nearby, checking each one as if ensuring none still lived. When he finally turned to her, Evelyn's breath caught. She could not read his eyes, neither cruel nor kind, simply steady, watchful. He said something in a language she did not understand, his tone low and even. She flinched when he knelt beside her, but he didn't reach for her roughly. Instead, he tore a strip from his own shirt, dipped it in his water pouch, and pressed it gently to the blood on her temple. Her lips trembled. Why are you helping me?" He paused. His English came haltingly. "You are not one of them." Evelyn looked at him through tears. "And you?" she whispered. "Are you going to kill me too?" His expression did not change. He lifted her carefully, cradling her against his chest like something fragile, not a possession but a person. "No," he said simply. "I take you safe." She wanted to resist, to scream, to run, but the warmth of his chest, the steady thump of his heartbeat, and the faint scent of cedar on his skin lulled her fading strength. As he carried her away from the smoke and ruin, Evelyn's last sight of the camp was the sun rising over her father's body and the burning wagons. She thought she was leaving everything behind, her past, her people, her very name. She didn't yet know that she was being carried not into captivity, but into the beginning of a life she never imagined, a life where fear would slowly learn the shape of safety, and safety would take the form of the Apache warrior who refused to demand, only to protect. When Evelyn next woke, the world was no longer fire and blood but earth and silence. She lay beneath a canopy of pine branches, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of smoke and cedar. The soft murmur of a nearby stream filled the air. Her body ached from the beating and the journey, but the throbbing pain was almost a comfort. It meant she was still alive. Her eyes fluttered open to the sight of the Apache warrior crouched by the stream, washing his hands. He moved with calm precision, his gestures neither hurried nor harsh. His long dark hair hung loose now, and the early sunlight caught on his copper skin. He turned slightly, meeting her gaze without surprise, as though he had been waiting for her to wake. Evelyn tensed, unsure whether to speak or flee. She glanced around. His horse grazed nearby, his weapon stacked neatly beside a fallen log. There was no rope, no sign of her being bound. Freedom, it seemed, was hers, yet she could not move. "You took me," she whispered hoarsely, her throat dry as ash. He nodded once, reaching for a wooden bowl and filling it with water. "You were dying," he said in his quiet, halting English. "I bring you here." He held out the bowl. She hesitated, staring at it as though it might be a trick. But thirst burned her resolve, and she drank greedily, the coolness easing her cracked lips. He watched her, not as a captor watches his prize, but as a healer studies a wound. When she handed the bowl back, she forced herself to ask, "What will you do with me?" He seemed to think for a moment before answering. "Nothing," the words startled her. She waited for more, but he simply rose and went about tending the fire, adding wood and stoking the coals. The scent of roasting rabbit drifted through the camp. Her stomach twisted with hunger, yet she felt almost ashamed to eat. As the day unfolded, she began to see who he truly was, a man shaped by quiet discipline, not violence. His name, she learned, was Dakota, meaning friend to everyone. He spoke little, using gestures more often than words. When he saw her struggle to sit, he helped her without touching her skin directly, mindful of her fear. He cooked, fetched water, and even offered her his own share of food before eating himself. It unsettled her, the gentleness of it. The men she had known before, even among her own kind, often carried an edge of command, a need to control. But Dakota carried no such hunger. His silence held strength, not pride. At sunset, when the mountains turned gold and violet, Evelyn sat near the fire, her blanket drawn tight. "Why did you help me?" she asked again. He looked up from sharpening his knife. "A man," he said slowly, searching for the right words, "takes life. For hate, I take life. For peace," she frowned softly. "You mean the bandits?" He nodded. "They hurt my people. Hurt you too, bad men. No Apache." His jaw tightened briefly before he returned to his task. "You stay safe here." "Then go," she blinked. "Go? You're letting me leave?" He met her gaze with a hint of amusement. "You think I make cage for woman?" The words hit her harder than she expected. For the first time since the attack, she felt the burn of tears, not from pain but from confusion. Freedom had been taken from her, and now this stranger was handing it back without demand, without condition. Later that night, she couldn't sleep. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying faint echoes of her old life. She watched him from across the fire. He sat motionless, his profile strong and solemn against the flames, his eyes reflecting something deeper than the night, something she didn't yet understand. Her voice broke the quiet. "Dakota?" He turned his head slightly. "Thank you," she said, the words trembling. He inclined his head just once and said softly, "Sleep now." And for the first time since her father's death, Evelyn closed her eyes and did. She didn't dream of bandits or fire. She dreamed of the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the feeling of being carried, not as a burden but as something worth saving. Morning came quietly, like a whisper through the pines. The air was cool, the kind that carried the scent of damp earth and juniper. Evelyn woke to find Dakota already gone from camp, his horse tracks leading toward the ridge. Panic surged through her chest until she saw the fire still burning low, and a small bundle of dried meat and berries laid beside her. He hadn't abandoned her. He had simply gone to hunt or scout, whatever it was men like him did to keep living on the edge of wilderness. For the first time, she moved freely around the clearing. Her body still ached, but she was stronger. The stream glittered nearby, and when she knelt to drink, her reflection startled her. Her face was bruised, her hair tangled and streaked with soot, but her eyes, those pale blue eyes her mother had once called sky after rain, looked older now. Harder. When Dakota returned, carrying a rabbit and a bundle of roots, she tried to stand. He motioned for her to stay seated, then crouched beside the fire. His movements were quiet, deliberate, efficient. She watched him in silence for a long while before finally asking, "You live here alone?" He nodded. "Far from tribe. Why?" His eyes flickered toward her, then back to the flames. "Because I chose not to fight." She didn't understand, not fully, but there was something in the way he said it, a weight of memory that told her the story was not simple. So she said nothing more. Instead, she helped him clean the rabbit, awkwardly mimicking his methods until her clumsy hands drew a small smile from him. It was the first time she'd seen him almost human. As the days passed, the rhythm of survival took shape between them. Dakota taught her how to crush herbs to soothe pain, how to build a fire even when the wood was damp, how to read the sky before rain. His English was broken, her Apache non-existent, so their lessons were often silent. Hands guiding hands, gestures replacing words. Evelyn began to realize that she was learning more than just survival. She was learning the quiet language of trust. Each evening, when the sun bled over the horizon, she would ask small questions, and sometimes he would answer. She learned that Dakota once had a brother, killed by white soldiers years ago, and that he had turned his back on revenge, choosing solitude instead of more blood. His tribe called him coward. He called it peace. And sometimes, when the wind carried faint echoes from the valley, distant laughter or the beating of drums, Evelyn saw the flicker of pain in his expression, the loneliness he carried like a scar beneath the calm. She wanted to tell him her own story, to speak of her father's kindness, her mother's lullabies, the ache of loss, but words caught in her throat. When she tried, tears came instead. Without a word, Dakota handed her his water pouch and looked away, giving her dignity in her grief. One evening, as the air turned cold and the stars began to bloom, Evelyn found herself sitting closer to him by the fire than she had before. She could feel the heat of his presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing. He was sharpening his knife, and she watched the firelight dance along its edge. "Do you hate us?" she asked. Suddenly he paused. "Who?" "My people." He took his time before answering. "I hate no people. I hate only what they do." His tone held no accusation, only quiet truth. She nodded, staring into the flames, her heart twisting in a way she couldn't name. That night she couldn't sleep again, not because of fear, but because of how safe she felt. It frightened her more than danger ever had. To feel safe beside a man her world called savage, to trust the very hands she'd been taught to fear. In the stillness she realized that she no longer belonged entirely to the life she'd lost, nor did she truly belong here. She was suspended between two worlds, the one that birthed her and the one that was slowly, silently teaching her how to live again. And though she didn't yet know it, this fragile peace between them would soon be tested by a storm greater than either could imagine. A storm of soldiers, vengeance, and choices that would decide whether her heart would remain split between worlds, or finally choose where it belonged. The morning air was sharp, scented with pine and smoke, carrying the distant sound of rushing water through the canyon. Evelyn had grown used to the rhythm of the mountains, the gentle sway of the trees, the quiet murmur of the stream, the occasional call of a hawk overhead. Life, she realized, had begun to settle into a fragile order, but the peace was deceptive, as all fragile things often are. Dakota had left before dawn as usual, tracking game or scouting the edges of the forest. Evelyn sat by the fire, tending the small garden of roots and herbs he had taught her to cultivate. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind wandered. Each sound made her jump, a twig snapping, the rustle of leaves, the wind whipping through the canyon. The fear that had once gripped her relentlessly had softened, but it lingered like a shadow at the edges of her vision. By mid-morning, the sound of hoofbeats reached her ears. Not the gentle rhythm of Dakota's horse, but a group, riding fast and with purpose. Evelyn's heart lurched. She grabbed the bow Dakota had given her, shaking slightly, her eyes scanning the horizon. The riders slowed as they approached, and she saw the telltale signs. Apache scouts, familiar to Dakota, yet tense, wary. They dismounted quickly, speaking to each other in their language, and one of them came forward to her. "You," he said sharply, pointing to her. Evelyn froze. Dakota returned moments later, his expression calm but alert. He took in the scene with a single glance, then crouched beside her, his hand resting lightly on the back of her shoulder. "They say white soldiers are moving east," the scout said in broken English. "They seek revenge. They kill without mercy." Evelyn's stomach dropped. The bandits were gone, but soldiers, organized, armed, and relentless, were coming. Her pulse raced. She glanced at Dakota. He met her gaze, expression unreadable. "You can go," he said simply. What?" Her voice faltered. "I can go?" "Yes, north," he said, pointing toward the distant hills. "Fort, soldiers, safety." Her mind spun. Safety, but at what cost? She had no map, no supplies, no knowledge of the world beyond this valley. And yet, staying meant facing danger unknown. Leaving meant returning to the world she had fled, the one that had killed her father and torn her mother from her arms. "I can't," she whispered, voice trembling. "I don't know the way. I'll die out there." He shook his head, a small gesture of quiet firmness. "Then stay, trust me." "Danger is here, yes, but I protect you." Evelyn's throat tightened. For the first time since the attack, she realized that fear and trust could exist side by side, twisting her heart in a way she didn't fully understand. Dakota's offer was simple, yet monumental. She could go or she could stay. Either choice would shape her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Hours passed as they prepared. Dakota repaired the fire, checked weapons, and gathered water. Evelyn watched him work silently, admiring the precision and care in everything he did. She wanted to help, but every motion she made felt clumsy, a reminder that she was still learning to survive, still an outsider in this rugged world. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, the scouts left, disappearing like shadows. The warning remained. Soldiers would come, and they would not stop for mercy or innocence. Evelyn sat quietly, watching the stars emerge. Dakota came to her side, silent as the night. "You choose?" he asked softly. She shook her head. I think I stay." He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. No celebration, no relief, just a quiet acceptance. He knew the path ahead would be difficult, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but she had made her choice. She would trust him, not because she understood everything about him, but because for the first time, she felt that trust was worth something. That night, as they huddled near the fire, Evelyn realized that the war was not just outside the valley. It would also be in her heart, testing her courage, her loyalty, and the fragile bond forming between her and the man who had rescued her. The world she had fled was catching up, and soon she would have to decide not only how to survive, but how to live in a world that had already taken so much from her. The storm came without warning. Clouds rolled over the mountains like a gray tide, swallowing the sun and draping the valley in a dim, cold shadow. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, soaking the earth and turning the path to mud. Evelyn huddled beneath a thick pine branch, shivering, her clothes plastered to her skin. She had grown accustomed to survival, yet the storm brought a new kind of fear, the kind that whispered of helplessness, of being entirely at the mercy of the world around her. Dakota appeared through the curtain of rain, his silhouette steady against the gray sky. He carried her blanket, draped it over her shoulders, and motioned for her to follow. Without a word, he guided her toward a cave he had discovered weeks earlier, a safe haven he had prepared for emergencies like this. Inside, the cave was dry and warm, a hidden sanctuary carved by the mountain itself. Evelyn sank to the floor, exhausted, letting the warmth seep into her aching muscles. She was wet, muddy, and shivering, yet she felt a flicker of relief. For the first time in weeks, she could rest without fearing the next attack. Dakota crouched near the entrance, scanning the stormy landscape. His knife lay across his lap, his eyes sharp and alert. Evelyn watched him, the firelight flickering on his face, and something stirred in her chest. A mix of awe, gratitude, and a strange, unfamiliar longing. She swallowed nervously. "Dakotas, why did you save me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he sharpened his knife, the rhythmic scraping echoing in the cave. Then finally he looked at her, eyes steady. "Because you did not look at me with hate." Evelyn's heart skipped. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. I don't understand." He shook his head slightly. "Others, they see me as enemy. You?" He paused. "You saw only me." She wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but words failed her. All she could do was stare at him, the warmth of his presence pressing against the cold fear that still lingered inside her. The storm raged on, isolating them from the world beyond the cave. Evelyn realized that she had a choice: flee north toward the Fort Dakota had mentioned, returning to a world of soldiers and strangers, or stay here, with a man she barely knew yet trusted more than anyone else in her life. The choice weighed heavily on her, each path a gamble, each possibility filled with uncertainty. She finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to stay." Dakota's expression softened, though he said nothing. Instead, he moved closer, careful not to invade her space, and handed her a bundle of dry cloth and herbs. His gesture spoke louder than words: protection, care, and acceptance. Hours passed. They ate in silence, the storm drumming against the stone outside, the fire crackling between them. The cave, once merely a shelter, became a sanctuary. Evelyn felt her fear ebb, replaced by something new, a tentative sense of belonging. Later, as the storm began to ease, they sat together near the fire. Evelyn glanced at him, the man who had rescued her, who had offered her freedom without demand, and whose quiet strength had become her anchor. Her heart thumped with a mixture of fear and desire. She realized that trust had grown into something more, a fragile, potent connection she couldn't ignore. Dakota looked at her, reading the same unspoken thoughts she held close. He did not reach for her, did not force his presence into her space. Instead, he simply offered a gaze full of understanding, respect, and something deeper, something neither of them had named, but both could feel. That night, as the cave settled into silence and the storm passed into distant rumble, Evelyn lay awake thinking of the choice she had made. She had chosen to stay, to trust, to step into the unknown. And in doing so, she realized that survival alone was not enough. She wanted to live, and perhaps in time she wanted more. The storm had passed, but the heart, she understood, is never safe from the winds of change. And she was learning slowly that love, like survival, was a choice she would have to make again and again. The morning sun broke through a thin layer of clouds, casting a golden haze over the valley. Evelyn rose slowly, her body still sore from the storm and the journey through the mud-soaked mountains. Dakota was already awake, sitting near the fire with his knife in hand, sharpening its edge with steady precision. His calm, methodical presence was a comfort, but Evelyn could not shake the unease that had settled deep in her chest. As she stretched and gathered water from the stream, something caught her eye, a glint of silver half buried in the soil. Kneeling, she brushed the dirt away and found a delicate locket, engraved with intricate filigree and a faded photograph inside. Her mother's face smiled at her from decades past. Her hands trembled as she clutched it, the memories flooding back, the lullabies, the warm embrace, the safety she had once taken for granted. "Dakota," she called softly, holding up the locket. "This, I think it belonged to my mother. It must have been left behind when the bandits came." He glanced at the locket, then back at the mountains beyond the valley. His face remained calm, but his eyes carried a shadow of concern. "Danger follow you?" he asked quietly, almost as if he feared the answer. Evelyn swallowed hard. I don't know. But if the bandits are still alive, if someone knows I survived, they could come for me again. Or worse." Dakota rose and walked to the edge of the clearing, scanning the distant hills with sharp, practiced eyes. "They white men?" "Yes," she said, hugging the locket to her chest. "And they don't care who they hurt. They'll take anything. They think they can own everything, even people." He nodded slowly. His silence carried weight. "Revenge brings only ghosts," he said finally. His voice was low, measured, but there was an edge of warning she had learned to respect. "You cannot fight alone." Evelyn's pulse quickened. She had felt this fire before. The desire to strike back, to find the ones who destroyed her family, to reclaim what had been stolen. She wanted vengeance. She wanted justice. But she also felt the weight of his words, the truth in his calmness. Dakota had chosen peace over bloodshed, and his restraint was a lesson she had not yet fully understood. "I can't just sit here while everything is lost," she said, her voice trembling. "I have to do something." Dakota stepped closer, his gaze meeting hers. "Then I go with you," he said simply, "but not for revenge, for safety, not to hurt, only protect. You ready?" Evelyn looked down at the locket in her hands. It was a link to the past she had lost, a reminder of everything she had survived and a reason to fight, not for hatred, but for life. Her fingers tightened around it, and she nodded. I am ready." The day passed as they prepared for the journey ahead. Dakota packed supplies with meticulous care, herbs for healing, dried meat, water, and his weapons. Evelyn helped where she could, though she still struggled with the unfamiliar tools of survival. Each moment was a lesson, each gesture a silent acknowledgement of trust and reliance. As twilight descended over the valley, Evelyn and Dakota settled near the fire. She placed the locket around her neck, the weight of it comforting. Dakota watched her in silence, the flames reflecting in his steady eyes. Neither spoke for a long time, each lost in thought. Finally, Evelyn whispered, "I don't know what will happen next, Dakota, but I know one thing. I want to face it with you." He nodded, a subtle, unspoken promise passing between them. "Then together," he said. "No ghosts, no hate, only safe." That night, the wind carried the scent of rain and pine through the valley. Evelyn lay awake, the locket warm against her chest, the knowledge of the past whispering through her thoughts. The road ahead would be dangerous, full of unknowns and threats, but for the first time, she felt a strange calm. Dakota had shown her that safety was not the absence of fear, but the presence of someone who would never demand her, only protect her. And for Evelyn, that was more powerful than any weapon, any revenge, any dream of justice. Evelyn awoke to the soft whisper of wind through the canyon, the golden sunlight of early morning casting long shadows across the valley floor. Dakota had left before dawn, tracking the paths he had scouted earlier. She had grown accustomed to his absences, trusting him to return. But today the silence pressed against her chest in a way that made her uneasy. She rose quietly, stretching her sore limbs, and scanned the ridgelines. The valley appeared empty, but her instincts, a combination of fear and learned caution, told her something had shifted. Perhaps it was the lingering shadow of the bandits, perhaps the echo of the soldiers rumored to be moving east. Either way, the unease would not leave her. By mid-morning, she spotted a group of riders descending into the valley. Her stomach twisted. They were armed, riding with purpose, and their eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the terrain as though they had been expecting someone. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. She considered fleeing, but every route out of the valley would leave her exposed. Dakota returned shortly after, moving with a quiet urgency. He had sensed the danger before she did, reading the subtle signs in the wind, in the broken brush, in the distant hoofbeats. His eyes narrowed as he assessed the intruders. Without a word, he crouched beside her, guiding her into a shallow depression near the stream where the tall grass offered some cover. "They know you are here," he said softly, his voice calm but firm. "They mean to capture, or worse." Evelyn clutched the locket around her neck, her fingers trembling. "We can't fight them all," she whispered. He shook his head. "No fight. Follow." Moving with the stealth and precision of a predator, Dakota led her through the valley, taking paths he had scouted for just this purpose. The intruders were relentless, their eyes scanning the terrain, their movements sharp and practiced. Evelyn could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, each step a mix of fear and trust as she followed Dakota blindly. Hours later, they reached the ridge above a narrow canyon. Dakota motioned for her to stay behind a cluster of rocks while he scouted below. Evelyn watched as he disappeared into the brush, his figure blending with the shadows. Time stretched, each second heavy with anticipation. She gripped the bow he had taught her to use, though she doubted she could strike a target even if it meant survival. Then, from the canyon below, came the sound of shouts and a struggle. Her heart leapt. Dakota was not alone. She strained to see, and through the tangle of branches she caught sight of him confronting the lead rider. Blows were struck, and the crack of wood against flesh rang out sharply. Dakota moved like a force of nature, precise, controlled, deadly. But even in his skill, he was careful. He fought to protect, not to punish. Moments later, the valley fell silent again. Dakota emerged, his chest rising and falling, his face streaked with sweat and dust. He had subdued them without unnecessary cruelty, leaving only the faint sound of retreating hooves behind. He returned to Evelyn, crouching beside her. "Safe," he said simply, his voice a grounding force in the aftermath. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear but relief. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. He shook his head, brushing off her words. "No thanks. Only survive, only safe." For the first time, Evelyn understood the full depth of what Dakota had done. He had risked himself not for glory, not for power, but for her. He had chosen to protect, to preserve, to offer life and safety instead of demands or ownership. The realization settled in her chest like a seed, fragile but growing, hinting at something stronger, trust, admiration, and something more dangerous still, attachment, a bond that neither time nor distance could easily sever. That night, as they settled by the fire, Evelyn rested her head on her arms and stared into the flames. She thought of the men they had evaded, of the relentless danger that still lurked beyond the valley, and of the man beside her who had fought not for vengeance but for her. And in the quiet, she made a silent promise she would trust him, follow him, and when the time came, stand by him, not as a captive, not as someone saved, but as a partner in the fragile wild life they were carving together. The valley lay quiet that morning, the early sun casting soft gold across the trees and stream. Evelyn stirred from sleep, careful not to wake Dakota. For weeks they had lived in this delicate rhythm, each day a lesson in survival, each moment a balance between fear and trust. Yet as the days passed, Evelyn began to realize that what she had once called safety was not just shelter from danger. It was something more profound, something she had never truly known. She rose and walked to the stream, the cold water rushing over her hands. Her reflection rippled in the current, pale face, sun-streaked hair, eyes wide with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. She had survived the bandits, the storm, and the relentless dangers of the wild, yet she knew the truth. She could not have done it alone. Dakota appeared silently as always, his presence calm and unobtrusive. He crouched beside her, filling a small wooden bowl with water and offering it without a word. She accepted it, her fingers brushing his. For a fleeting moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift, replaced by something neither fragile nor fleeting. The knowledge that here, in this wild, untamed place, she was safe. "You," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Why did you take me in? Why did you save me?" He met her gaze, his dark eyes steady and unreadable. Yet there was a warmth there she had never seen before. "I once had chance," he said slowly, choosing each word. "Chance to lead my people. And fail." Evelyn frowned, unsure she understood. "Fail?" He nodded. "Many years ago a woman, a white woman, was taken by my people. I refused. I chose mercy over power. Tribe called me coward. But peace, life, precious, not things." His voice was quiet, deliberate, almost haunted. "I will not take what is not mine." Evelyn's chest tightened. The truth was raw, simple, and devastating in its clarity. Dakota had once sacrificed everything rather than harm another, choosing the weight of exile over the easy power of possession. And now he had done the same for her, not taking her, not claiming her, simply offering safety and trust and leaving the choice to her. I don't know what to say," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "I've been so used to being taken, controlled, to fear what men might do. And you give me freedom." He inclined his head slightly, his expression softening for the first time. "Freedom is safe, only safe. His love." Her heart thudded in her chest. She wanted to reach for him, to grasp what she felt simmering beneath her fear and gratitude. But she hesitated. Dakota did not demand, did not push. His restraint was both excruciating and comforting, a lesson in patience, in trust, in understanding. Days passed in quiet companionship. They tended the fire, gathered herbs, hunted small game, and spoke in a mixture of broken English and gestures. The valley, once simply a place to survive, became a sanctuary. Evelyn felt the fragile threads of her heart weaving back together, strengthened by the steady presence of the man who had saved her without expecting anything in return. One evening, as the sky blazed orange and pink over the mountains, Evelyn sat beside Dakota, her hand brushing against his. The silence was comfortable, full of unspoken acknowledgement. I'm beginning to understand," she said softly. "Safety isn't just a place or protection. It's trust. It's knowing someone will not take, will not demand, will simply be." He turned toward her, his gaze steady and intense. "Yes, trust, choice, life, only safe, is real." In that moment, Evelyn understood the full weight of what he had given her. Not just survival, not just protection, but the right to choose, the right to live, and the freedom to feel without fear. And for the first time since the attack on her wagon train, she felt not only safe, but truly alive. The mountains whispered around them, carrying the promise of challenges to come. But for now, in this hidden valley, Evelyn knew the truth of safety. And in that truth, she began to glimpse the possibility of something more. Love that was patient, steadfast, and born from freedom rather than force. The valley had grown quiet, almost deceptively so. For weeks, Evelyn and Dakota had lived among the pines and the river, their lives a rhythm of hunting, gathering, and quiet companionship. The world outside seemed distant, reduced to the memory of bandits, storms, and soldiers. Yet the peace they had carved in the mountains was fragile, and whispers of the past began to stir. One morning, while Evelyn tended the small fire and prepared breakfast, the sound of distant hoofbeats drifted through the trees. She stiffened immediately, her hand instinctively moving to the bow Dakota had taught her to wield. Dakota rose from his crouch, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. "They come," he said quietly, his voice calm but carrying a weight she recognized. "My people tribe," her heart skipped. The Apache had not forgotten him, and now they had found this secluded valley. She glanced at him, uncertainty and fear swirling in her chest. What do they want?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he adjusted his leather straps and readied his weapons, a man preparing not to fight but to negotiate. Finally, he spoke. "They want me to return, to lead. They will take anything. If I stay, they demand woman. You." Evelyn's breath caught. Her body froze in place, every instinct screaming that she could not be demanded, could not be traded like a possession. She clutched the locket at her neck, the reminder of her past, of her family, and the life she had survived. "No," she said firmly, her voice shaking but resolute. "I will not be given. I will not be traded." Dakota turned toward her, eyes meeting hers. A faint smile brushed his face, a mixture of pride and relief. "You speak truth. Good." Hours later, the Apache scouts appeared over the ridge, their numbers greater than she had imagined. They rode with precision, their presence both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Dakota met their leader at the edge of the valley. They spoke in a language she did not understand, their voices carrying authority and command. Yet even in the tension, she sensed respect forming, not for her, but for her courage, her refusal to be silenced, her refusal to be a thing in a world that often treated women as such. Evelyn stayed close to Dakota, watching silently. She had come to understand him in ways no one else could. He did not raise his voice. He did not make threats. Instead, he stood firm, his posture calm, his eyes unwavering, and spoke only as needed. After what felt like hours, the leader dismounted. His eyes swept over Evelyn and then returned to Dakota. There was a pause, heavy and deliberate. Finally, he inclined his head. "She chooses," he said simply. "You may stay." Relief washed over her, but it was more than that. There was respect in the acknowledgement of her choice. For the first time, Evelyn felt that she was seen not as a prize or a captive, but as a person with her own will, her own agency. Dakota returned to her side, kneeling beside the fire. "You see?" he said softly. "Choice is power. Only safe is love." Evelyn reached for his hand, letting her fingers intertwine with his. The fear and uncertainty that had shadowed her for so long began to ease, replaced by something stronger: trust, connection, and the realization that she had found a home not just in the valley, but with the man who had never demanded her, only protected her. As the scouts departed, the valley settled into silence again. Evelyn leaned against Dakota, the warmth of his body a steady anchor in the quiet. She had faced danger, loss, and the weight of expectation, yet she had chosen not just survival but freedom, trust, and love. The world outside might still hold threats, but in this hidden corner of the mountains, Evelyn finally understood that courage was not only in facing enemies, it was in standing for one's heart, in refusing to be a thing claimed by others, and in choosing the life she wanted alongside the man who had saved her without ever demanding a single thing in return. The valley had transformed with the seasons. Spring had arrived with a burst of wildflowers, painting the earth in hues of gold, purple, and crimson. The river, once swollen and angry from winter storms, now glimmered in the sunlight, its gentle flow reflecting the calm that had settled over the mountains. Evelyn stood on a small rise overlooking their home, a simple cabin built of stone and timber, smoke curling lazily from the chimney. It was modest, but it was theirs, a testament to survival, resilience, and the quiet, steady work of two people who had carved a life from the wilderness. Dakota emerged from the cabin, carrying a bundle of firewood. His movements were smooth, purposeful, and Evelyn felt a pang of affection watching him, the way the sunlight caught his hair and highlighted the strong lines of his face. He smiled, a rare, unguarded expression reserved only for her, and she felt warmth spread through her chest. "Morning," he said, voice low and steady. "Morning," she replied, brushing dirt from her hands. She walked toward him, the familiarity of their routine making the day feel safe and predictable in a way that the past never had. Together they set about their chores. Dakota repaired a section of the cabin roof, while Evelyn tended the small garden of herbs and vegetables she had planted. The rhythm of their work was comforting, almost meditative. Each task completed was a small victory, a reinforcement of the life they were building together, away from the cruelty and chaos that had once consumed Evelyn's world. Later, they sat by the river washing the day's tools and laughing quietly at minor mishaps. For the first time since the attack on her wagon train, Evelyn felt the luxury of unburdened time, the simple joy of shared labor, the warmth of a companion who neither demanded nor dominated. She glanced at Dakota, whose dark eyes met hers with the same calm intensity they always held. There was no need for words. The bond between them had been forged in fire, blood, and survival, and now it thrived in peace. As the sun began its slow descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Evelyn felt the weight of the past lift, replaced by a sense of belonging she had never known. She remembered the terror of that first night, the loss of her parents, the pain and fear that had followed her like a shadow. She had been beaten by fate, yet here she stood, alive, strong, and free. Dakota sat beside her, silent but present. He reached for her hand, and for the first time their fingers intertwined without hesitation. Evelyn leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her own. "I never thought I could feel safe like this," she whispered. "You are safe," he said simply. "Because you choose. You trust. You live." The stars began to emerge one by one, painting the sky with silver light. Evelyn traced constellations she had learned as a child, but now they seemed different. Symbols not of a past lost, but of a future earned. Around the fire, the cabin, and the river, the mountains held a quiet magic, a promise of life rebuilt on the foundation of courage and choice. In the months that followed, travelers would occasionally pass near their home and whisper of the white woman who lived with the Apache warrior, a woman who had been beaten by fate but had found love, freedom, and respect in the most unexpected of places. But Evelyn cared little for whispers. She cared for the steady presence of Dakota, the life they were crafting together, and the understanding that safety, trust, and love were not given. They were chosen. As night fully settled over the valley, Evelyn and Dakota sat side by side, hands intertwined, listening to the gentle flow of the river and the quiet rustle of the trees. The world beyond their valley might always hold dangers, but here, in the home they had built, Evelyn knew a profound truth, that even when fate is cruel, it can be redeemed by courage, trust, and the unwavering choice to live and to love. And in the quiet of the mountains, under a sky full of stars, Evelyn finally understood that she had not just survived, she had truly come home.